unsettling. I am. My phone vibrates. A security alert appears on the screen. Movement in the living room. I check the camera feed. The light is on, but I am at work. Then, a shadow crosses the hallway. I have the only set of keys. They are right here, in my hand.
Story 1. I installed the security app because the landlord kept saying the building was safe. New locks, new camera package, motion sensors on the doors. I even got a cheap indoor camera for the living room. Window alerts, phone access. It looked useful, but I never thought I would actually need it. I lived alone on the 3rd floor of a narrow building. One main entrance, one dim stairwell. The front door opened straight into the living room. Small place, easy to check, easy to lock. Every night I followed the same routine. I came in, dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl near the door, put my wallet beside them. I plugged my phone into the charger on the kitchen counter. Checked that the bedroom window was latched. Locked the door twice before going to sleep. Nothing in that apartment ever changed unless I touched it. That was why I noticed the first thing. I was at work when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked down and saw an alert from the app. Motion detected in living room. I opened it right away. The camera showed the room empty, sofa against the wall. Lamp off, table clear. My jacket was still on the chair where I had left it. I watched for a few seconds. Nothing moved. The window blinds were still. The sensor icon stayed green. I locked the screen and went back to work. 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. Motion detected in hallway. This time, I stayed on the live feed longer. The camera could only see part of the hall. Just the opening near the bathroom door. The light in the hallway was on. I did not leave that light on in the morning. I zoomed in with my fingers. The image broke into pixels, then sharpened again. Nothing there, just the bright strip of the hall and the shadow line from the bathroom frame. A third alert came before I could put the phone away. Motion detected in living room. I rewound the event clip. A short recording loaded. The frame was still for 2 seconds. Then, the camera adjusted focus. At the far right edge, where the hallway opened into the living room, something dark crossed the wall for less than a second. Not a full person, not enough to make out a face. Just a shoulder or an arm passing too close to the camera. I called my neighbor across the hall. No answer. I called the woman downstairs. She picked up and said she was not home. I asked if she had seen anyone go in. She said no. I told her the app was sending alerts from inside the apartment. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, maybe the system was broken. I opened the front camera history. The front door sensor showed closed all day. No opening, no tamper warning, no forced entry alert. The only activity was inside. I left work early. I kept the app open while I walked to the car. Another alert. Motion detected in kitchen. The living room camera did not show the kitchen directly, only the edge of the doorway. Friend, I watched the doorway. The kitchen light was on now too. I always turn that light off before leaving. I got in the car and placed the phone on the dash. The alerts cycled in order. Living room, hallway, kitchen, bedroom. The timestamps showed 3 minutes between each. I called the police from the road. I told them the security app showed repeated movement inside my apartment, and the lights were turning on by themselves. They asked if I had pets. I said no. They asked if anyone else had a key. I said only the landlord, and he was out of town. By the time I reached the building, 2 officers were already outside. I stayed on the sidewalk while they went in. Their steps moved up the stairwell. Then, I heard my apartment door unlock. I had given them the code from the smart lock app. A few seconds later, the feed cut for a moment. then returned. The living room camera showed one officer passing in front of it. They checked every room. I could hear doors opening inside through the building stairwell window. Closet, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen cabinets, under the bed. One officer came back down and told me they found nothing. No damage, no missing items, windows locked, door secure. He asked if I wanted them to stay while I checked the system. I said yes. We all went upstairs together. The apartment looked normal at first glance, but the lights were on exactly the way the app had shown them. Living room lamp on, hallway light on, kitchen light on, bedroom light on. The officers stood near the door while I walked through the rooms. Nothing knocked over, nothing broken. Then I reached the kitchen counter and stopped. My phone charger was plugged in, but the cable was uncoiled and hanging over the edge. I always wrapped it around the charger block before leaving. Beside it, the ceramic mug I had left in the sink was now upside down on the drying mat, clean. I had not washed it. One officer said maybe I had forgotten. I said nothing. We moved to the bedroom. The bedspread was smooth, but the closet door was open 4 inches. I kept that closet shut because it drifted wider on its own if left loose. Someone had closed it almost fully. Not all the way. The officer opened it and checked inside. Empty. When they finally left, they told me to call again if anything else happened. I locked the door behind them. The apartment was silent. I stood in the living room with the app open. The camera feed was facing me from my phone. I could see myself on the screen, standing near the sofa. I turned off the hallway light, then the kitchen light, then the bedroom light. I was about to turn off the living room lamp when the phone vibrated in my hand. Motion detected in hallway. I looked up at the dark hallway opening. Nothing there. I looked back at the screen. The yellow box from the motion tracker was active on the hall entrance. The app outlined movement in that black space beyond the living room. I did not move. The box stayed there for 2 seconds, then vanished. Another vibration came at once. Motion detected in bedroom. I was still standing in the living room. I tapped the event clip. The short recording loaded. The camera had captured me by the sofa, still holding the phone. Behind me, deep in the hallway, the bedroom door moved inward 1 inch, then stopped. I turned and looked at the hall. I switched on the hallway light. Empty. I walked down slowly. Bathroom, empty. Bedroom door, open, a little wider than before. I pushed it all the way open. The room was clear. Bed, desk, chair, closet, window, locked. I backed out, keeping my eyes on the room. The phone vibrated again. Motion detected in living room. I turned. The lamp I had left on beside the sofa was off now. The living room was dark. I walked back toward it and stopped at the hallway entrance. The live feed showed the living room empty. Then, on the screen only, a shape passed close, behind where I was standing. I spun around. The hallway behind me was clear. I went straight to the front door. I opened it, stepped into the building corridor, and pulled the door shut. My keys were in my pocket. I locked the smart lock from the app while standing outside. The deadbolt engaged with a hard metallic click. I stared at the door. No sound from inside. Then the phone buzzed again, motion detected near entryway. I was outside. The app showed the inside camera aimed toward the door. The frame held still for a second. Then, my ceramic key bowl slid off the table and hit the floor inside the apartment. The keys I had left in my pocket were not the only set. Story 2. I opened the car door and stopped. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than the previous day. The steering wheel angle was lower than usual. I adjusted both before sitting. The garage was quiet. Concrete floor, dry oil stains, pillars with yellow stripes. A single car was parked 2 spaces away. I closed the door. The interior light stayed on for a few seconds, then went off. I started the engine. The radio turned on at low volume, a station I never use. I pressed the power button. The sound cut. I drove out of the garage and into the street. At the first red light, the door locks clicked. Locked, unlocked, locked again. My hands stayed on the wheel. The dashboard showed all doors were closed. The light turned green. I moved forward. The locks stayed engaged. At the next intersection, the center screen flickered once. It went dark, then came back on, showing the home menu. I did not touch it. The temperature display changed by 1 degree, then returned to the previous number. I parked at work and shut the engine off. The radio came on for 1 second, then stopped. I opened the door. The interior light came on. The driver's seat slid back 1 notch, without any sound. I stepped out and looked at the rails under the seat. Clean, no debris, no obstruction. I locked the car with the key. The mirrors folded. The hazard lights flashed once. I walked away. 10 steps later, I heard a click behind me. I turned. The car lights flashed again. The mirrors folded again, even though they were already folded. I pressed the key. The car did not respond. I pressed it again. The car unlocked. I opened the door. The seat was all the way back now, almost touching the rear seat cushion. The headrest was tilted forward. I set everything back to my position and closed the door. I locked it, using the button on the handle instead of the key. The mirrors folded once. I stepped away without turning back. The next morning, the car was in the same place. The seat was pushed back again. The radio was on the same station, volume low. I turned it off. The center console storage was open, 2 centimeters. The lid was not fully closed. I pushed it down until it clicked. I checked the glove box. It was closed. I had not opened it the previous day. The air vents were angled toward the passenger side. I set them back to center. I looked at the floor mat on the passenger side. It was shifted forward, touching the glove box panel. I pulled it back until it lined up with the seat rails. I drove to work. Midway through the drive, the center screen turned on without input. The navigation opened. A map appeared, with a route already drawn. The starting point was my garage. The destination was a small street, 3 blocks from my building. The route history icon showed multiple entries to that same location. The list displayed several timestamps spaced across the previous night. I did not drive the car during those hours. I pressed back. The screen returned to the home page. At the next stop, the locks clicked. Locked, unlocked, locked. I pressed unlock. The doors stayed locked. I pressed again. Nothing changed. The interior light flickered once, then stayed off. I reached the office parking lot and parked. I turned the engine off. The locks clicked. Unlocked. I opened the door and stepped out. The radio turned on again for a second, then cut. I looked at the passenger seat. It was pushed all the way back. The seatbelt was stretched across it and latched into the buckle. The fabric of the belt was slightly twisted near the shoulder guide. I pressed the release. The belt snapped back into place. I checked the cup holder. The plastic bottle I kept there was half empty. I had filled it that morning. I unscrewed the cap. The rim was wet. I put the bottle back and locked the car manually. That evening, I returned late. The garage was empty. Same pillars, same stains, same echo. I opened the car. The interior light came on and stayed on longer than usual. I sat down. The seat moved back one notch by itself. I held the wheel. The locks clicked. Locked. I pressed unlock. Nothing. The center screen turned on. The navigation opened again. The same destination appeared. The route list showed repeated entries from different times. The timestamps included the current hour. The engine was off. The screen zoomed in. The map marker pulsed on the same street. The route list scrolled down one line without input. The locks clicked again. Unlocked. The driver door opened with a slight push from my hand. I stepped out. The interior light stayed on. The screen remained active. I closed the door. The locks clicked. Locked. I watched through the window. The passenger seat moved back one notch, then another. The headrest tilted forward one click. The radio came on at low volume, the same station. The display stayed on the navigation screen, with the same address highlighted. The route list updated again. A new entry appeared, with the current time. I moved closer to the car. The interior light dimmed slightly but did not turn off. The passenger seat stayed all the way back. The headrest remained tilted forward. I watched the seatbelt. The metal latch lifted 1 centimeter, then dropped back into place without touching the buckle. I left the car there. I did not drive it the next day. I returned in the afternoon with a coworker. We opened the car together. Everything looked normal. The driver's seat was in my position. The radio was off. The navigation showed no active route. I checked the history list. It was empty. I closed the screen. I checked the passenger side. The seat was all the way back. The seatbelt was pulled tight across it and latched into the buckle. The buckle showed wear marks around the latch plate. I pressed the release. The belt snapped back into place. I checked the glove box. It was slightly open this time. I pushed it closed until it clicked. The bottle in the holder was now empty. I turned it upside down. No drops came out. My coworker stood by the open door. He checked the rear seats. Nothing. Then he pulled one of the rear door handles from the inside. The switch was set to the locked position. He slid the switch back to the open position and closed the door. I locked the car and left. 2 mornings later, I went down before sunrise. The garage lights were still on timer mode. Half the ceiling was bright. The far end stayed dim. I stopped beside the car and looked through the window. The passenger seat was all the way back again. The seatbelt was latched again. The bottle was full again, with the cap tightened. I unlocked the door and opened it. The interior smelled faintly of deodorizer and cigarette smoke. I do not smoke, and I do not use air freshener. The center armrest was lifted. I keep it closed. Inside, it was a parking receipt from a hospital garage, printed at 2:14 in the morning. The date was from the previous night. My car had been in my building garage all night. I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket. I sat down and checked the odometer. The total mileage had increased by 23 kilometers since the last time I filled the tank. I had not driven those kilometers. I started the engine. The radio turned on at once. Same station, same low volume. I switched it off and put the car in reverse. The rear camera feed appeared on the screen. The garage lane behind me was empty. Then, the image flickered once. A face filled the passenger side of the frame for less than a second. Not outside the car. Inside, close to the backseat camera angle. Mouth closed. Skin pale. No glasses, dark hair, cut short. The image returned to the empty lane. I braked and looked over my shoulder. The rear seats were empty. I put the car in park and shut the engine off. The screen went black. Then the locks clicked. Locked. I pressed unlock. Nothing. I pressed again. Nothing. The interior light did not come on. I pulled the handle twice. The door stayed shut. The center screen lit up again without the engine running. The navigation opened. The same street appeared. The list of recent trips expanded down the screen. 5 entries, 7 entries, 9 entries. Same destination, different hours. Life. The passenger seat moved back one more notch. Then the seatbelt slid slowly across the fabric. The fabric pulled tight against the latch. The buckle clicked once, though it was already latched. I pressed the horn. The sound came out, weak and short. One burst. Then, nothing. I took the metal key from inside the fob and pushed it into the driver door slot. It turned halfway and stopped. I pushed harder. It did not move. The locks clicked again. Unlocked. I pulled the handle and the door opened. I stepped out and backed away from the car. The interior light came on 3 seconds later. The radio started again at low volume. A man stood by the 4th pillar across the lane. Dark jacket, dark trousers, phone at his ear. He lowered the phone and walked to the stairwell door without looking at me. I watched him pull it open with a key card. He went through and the door shut. I looked back at my car. The passenger seat was still all the way back. The seatbelt was still tight across it. The center screen was still lit. The destination on the map was not the small street anymore. It was my work address. The timestamp beside it was updating while I stood there outside the car. The engine was off. The keys were in my hand. But the trip had already started. Story 3. I found the camera in a box under the bed. Small, black. A USB cable was wrapped around it. The lens was scratched on one side. I placed it on the desk and plugged it into the computer. The red light turned on. The screen opened a window automatically. A live feed appeared. The image showed my room from a high corner angle. The desk, the bed, the door, the closet. Everything was in frame. I moved my hand in front of the lens. The image followed the movement without delay. I unplugged the camera. The red light went off. The window closed. That night, my phone vibrated once. A notification appeared. Unknown app. Live feed active. I opened it. The same image loaded. My room from the same angle. The desk. The bed. The door. The closet. I looked at the desk. The camera was there. Unplugged. No light. I picked it up. The phone still showed the feed. I covered the lens with my hand. The image on the phone did not change. I lowered my hand. The image remained the same. I closed the app and deleted it. The next morning, the app icon was back. I opened it again. The live feed started instantly. No loading screen. The same angle. The same room. I unplugged the router from the wall. The Wi-Fi light turned off. I switched off mobile data. The signal icon disappeared. I opened the app again. The feed continued without interruption. The image did not freeze. I placed the camera inside a drawer and closed it. I left the room and stood in the hallway. I opened the app. The image still showed the room from above. The drawer was closed. The camera was inside it. I returned to the room and opened the drawer. The camera was still there, unplugged, no light. That evening, I placed the camera inside a metal box and closed the lid. I left it on the kitchen counter. I went back to the bedroom and opened the app. The feed still showed the room from the same angle. I walked to the desk and stood directly under the angle shown on the phone. The image showed the top of my head. I stepped back. The image adjusted. I placed a piece of tape over the lens. The image on the phone did not change. I added a second layer of tape. The feed remained clear. I removed the tape. The camera lens was covered. But the phone still showed the same image. I turned off the power in the apartment. The lights went out. The appliances stopped. I opened the app. The feed continued. The room was visible with the same brightness. The image did not change. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room. Everything was dark. I looked at the phone. The room was lit. I stepped inside and closed the door. I stood still. The image on the phone showed the same position. Then, something appeared at the edge of the frame, a shape near the closet door. The image showed a vertical line, darker than the wall. I turned toward the closet. The door was closed. I opened it. Empty. Shelves. Clothes. No movement. I closed it. I looked back at the phone. The shape was still there, near the same spot. I stepped closer. The image showed the shape, extending upward. A narrow section, darker than the wall. I reached the wall with my hand. The surface was flat. No mark. No object. I moved my hand across it. The image on the phone did not change. I stepped back. The shape remained in the feed. Then, it shifted 1 centimeter toward the desk. The movement was slow, continuous, no sound. I watched the screen. The shape stopped. I unplugged every device in the room. The computer, the lamp, the charger. I removed the power strip from the wall. I opened the app. The feed continued. I placed the camera inside a backpack and zipped it closed. I carried it to the bathroom and placed it inside the cabinet, under the sink. I closed the cabinet door. I returned to the bedroom. The feed still showed the room from the same angle. I moved the chair in front of the desk. The position changed. The phone showed the same change. I pushed the chair back. The feed matched the movement. Then, the door handle in the image moved downward slowly. The door in front of me did not move. I looked at it. The handle stayed still. I looked back at the phone. The handle was fully pressed down. The door in the image opened 2 centimeters. I turned and grabbed the real handle. It was locked. I kept my hand on it. The door did not move. I looked at the phone. The door in the feed opened wider. The gap increased. I stepped away from the door and watched the screen. The door in the feed opened fully. The hallway appeared. Empty. Light off. I opened the real door. The hallway was dark. No movement. I closed it and locked it again. I looked back at the phone. The door in the feed was still open. The hallway remained visible. Then, a figure crossed the hallway in the feed. Fast. From left to right. Shoulder height. Head level. No face visible. I stepped into the hallway and looked both directions. Empty. I returned to the room. The phone still showed the hallway view. The door in the feed remained open. I reached for the real door to close it again. It was already closed. The phone vibrated once. A new notification appeared. Recording saved. I opened the file. The video started. The same angle, the same room, the same open door in the feed. The timestamp showed the current time. The recording continued for 10 seconds. The door in the feed stayed open. Then, the figure appeared again, this time closer to the doorway. The outline was clearer. Shoulders, head, arms down at the sides. It stopped at the threshold. The image froze for one frame, then it continued. The figure stepped inside the room in the feed. The distance between the camera and the figure decreased. The shape filled more of the frame. I looked around the room, no one there. I looked back at the phone. The figure stood near the desk, facing the camera. The recording ended. The live feed resumed. The room was empty again. The door in the feed closed slowly. I stepped toward the desk. The phone vibrated again. Another notification. Recording saved. I opened it. The same angle, the same room. But the frame angle lowered. The floor filled the bottom half of the screen. At the bottom edge of the image, 2 feet were visible. Standing near the desk, bare feet, pale skin, toes aligned toward the camera. I looked down at the floor in front of me. Nothing there. I stepped back. The phone vibrated again. The live feed continued. The feet in the image moved forward 1 step, then another, stopping directly below the camera position. The frame filled with the top of a head, dark hair, close to the lens. The live feed indicator on the phone turned red. A faint glow was visible through the backpack fabric under the sink. I walked to the bathroom and opened the cabinet. The camera was inside. The red light was on. The phone screen went black. Then a new image appeared. The feed angle changed. The screen displayed my face, close up, eyes aligned with the lens. Some devices don't fail. They keep recording. If something in your house shows movement, check it. If something in your car changes position, stop using it. If a device shows you something that should not exist, do not ignore it. Because once it starts, it does not stop. I am Tales of the Darkness, and not everyone who enters your home needs a key.